Today we're going to make Sfeehas. I'm not sure if that's the Syrian term for both. We're going to make spinach and meat today. Now I'm going to make an entire batch of dough, which I normally would make either the spinach or the meat. But we're going to do half and half so we can get the instruction all done in one day. And so of course I have to half the ingredients for the meat mixture and the spinach mixture. So first we're going to make the dough, because the dough has to rise anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. Make the dough. We need to add 1 package of yeast to a half a cup of warm water. So I've got to get to the sink. I make it really warm. The warmth helps it rise too. So in fact, we're going to put it outside because it's so hot out there today. Half a cup, let's see, almost. There we go. All right. You want the yeast not to be at the top where you snip it. And usually we pour the yeast into the half a cup of water. And this is a recipe, a whole recipe for the dough. So I'm following it exactly. Now we're gonna, using a little whisk, mix it all up. Get it off the sides. Okay, 1 package yeast dissolved in a half a cup of warm water. Now we add 1 more cup of warm water. Stir it again in case there's any more on the sides. And more yeast. Now pour it in now. And now we're going to add a half a cup of olive oil. We use a lot of olive oil to make these things. We cover our hands with it later. It's good for the skin though, right? Good moisturizer. Half a cup of olive oil. And then 2 teaspoons of salt and half a teaspoon of sugar. Half a teaspoon of sugar. The sugar helps the yeast to make the dough rise. That's why the sugar goes in, not for sweetening, it's for the rising. And 2 teaspoons of salt. One. 2. Okay. Very good. Okay, now I'm just going to mix that up as best you can. Doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be in the, you need, if you don't have a mixer with a bread hook, you better have good strong hands and prepare yourself to knead the dough for 10-15 minutes by hand. That's a lot of work. Okay. Now we're going to add 4 cups of flour. You always pat it down because today they use pre-sifted flour. And all of my recipes come from a time when there was no pre-sifted flour. So we'll actually add more because the pre-sifted is like airier. And this will be 4. This will get noisy, so we don't want to run it through the whole thing, but we'll stop in between. Well, that's not too bad. I do it on 1 for whatever reason. So that was 2 cups of flour, right? Spatula to push it down off the end, the sides. You have to keep doing this till the dough doesn't stick to your hands anymore. Then you know it's ready. To get kneaded properly, really mixed well. You see how it's still sticking? It's not too bad. Just a little sticking on my hands. I'm gonna add just a little bit more flour. I must have done a good job patting it down. so you can see I'm pushing harder this time. It's still sticking a little bit. So I'm going to put a little bit more. And I'm doing maybe 1/4 of a cup more at a time. That's it. Let's see. Oh, yeah. See how it's not sticking as bad as it was? Still gonna put a little more. So I would say now we've used almost 3/4 of a cup more. Now when this rises, it pretty much comes almost to the top of the bowl. Then you pat it down again. And if you ever want to make a half and half batch, just rewrite the fillings half of it so that you don't make a mistake trying to change it as you're going along. That's the easiest thing to do. Look coming. See, I'm pushing down and it's not sticking. That means it's done. So I put in about 3/4 of a cup in addition to the 4 cups of flour as we let it work. We're gonna cover this with a towel, and I'm bringing it outside, but I'm not putting it in the sun. I'm just bringing it into the shade outside where it will be warm. Just fold the towel in half, cover the bowl, and I'll be right back. Done, in the shade, between 2 and 3 hours. We'll see how it goes. It should come all the way up to the top, or pretty much. Okay, we're gonna make the spinach filling. Okay, so I'm going to do half of the regular recipe. I have I think I have about 18 ounces. I had a 12-ounce bag and then 6 ounces. Let me just wash my... The dough recipe was a full recipe. So we're going to make half spinach, half meat. So half spinach, here we go. I've defrosted. When you get your spinach out early in the morning from the freezer, put it in a colander, run water over it. And after, do it again, run it again and again. And after a while, you'll see it's all defrosted. It doesn't get cooked before. So I'm gonna be taking it out, putting it through the ricer, and squeeze and squeeze. Oops, put that one back in there. Gotta be careful. If you do it like that, it's gonna hit somebody or something. So you do it until almost nothing comes out. And that's good. And you put it in a bowl. Now you never know exactly how many you're going to get out of this because sometimes the dough works easier than other times, or sometimes you stuff them more than other times. But see how much water comes out. And it's been sitting in a colander for a couple of hours. But the spinach itself has a lot of water in it. And I always use frozen spinach. Frozen chopped spinach, I think. It's the easiest. All right, so that's the spinach. This will be half cup of pine nuts. Oh, and I always keep my nuts in the freezer if I don't use them regularly, use them up quickly because they stay a lot fresher. And pine nuts are expensive. So about 1/8 of a cup for a half a batch. That's good. All right. Half of a bunch of scallions. I wash them left them in the colander a bit, then I patted them dry, and then I chopped them fine. You want to see how they look, honey? Can you see it? Okay. The recipe, a whole recipe calls for 1 cup of fresh parsley chopped. I chopped already half a cup. So, and I refrigerated it. Things like the parsley and the scallions, you could do them the day before if you want. Because then you have that much less you have to do when you're cooking. Okay, it also calls for the juice of 3 lemons. Again, I use my own frozen fresh lemon juice. I'll just bring it over here. For a half a batch, 1 1/2. Whole batch juice of teaspoon each. Salt and allspice. All of this is to make a half a batch of spinach. And you just stir it up good. You want to break up the spinach as you're doing it because it's kind of clumpy. Make sure all the spices are off the side of the bowl. And the spinach. Okay. There you go. And that's it. Looking good. For the meat mixture, we're only using half of, again, I'm making a half batch, so instead of 2 pounds of ground lamb, I have 1 pound of ground lamb. And a half of large onion, chopped very fine. I don't put it through the processor, because then it's too wet, and it affects how the meat cooks. And this is a very large onion, so I'm gonna put most of it, and we'll see if we're gonna need any more by how the meat looks. All right. Okay, so the meat filling calls for half a cup of pine nuts rinse. So I'm gonna use a 1/4 cup of pine nuts, and I'm gonna rinse them this time, so you see. Whoops, I don't wanna waste pine nuts. Very expensive. I can only think it must be hard to harvest them, that they charge so much. It's like $16 a pound or something for these things. So I just rinse it, let it drain. And then throw it in. We need, for a half a cup of plain yogurt and 1 teaspoon each salt and allspice. Let me put that on since I have it sitting here. Always 1 teaspoon each per pound when you're using lamb meat. That makes it easy to remember. Half a cup of yogurt. I use the thick Greek yogurt is the best to use, especially for cooking, but I use it for everything. Okay, good. Lemon. That's a half a fresh squeezed lemon. Approximately. Ready? Mm-hmm. All right. Here's what it looks like. And you'll see what it's gonna look like. The yogurt and lemon give the meat a nice tang. It's just so much more flavorful than just having meat. You want to keep doing it till the yogurt is really dispersed in there. And to me, it looks like I put enough onion in. You don't want an excessive amount. I think that onion was just too large. But I'll show you when I'm done how it looks. Feels good. So, You can see the pieces of onion. That means you got plenty. You can see the pine nuts. And the meat is whitish because of the yogurt. And that's it. Now you refrigerate. Okay. All right. Round 2. You always have a little cup of olive oil. First thing you're gonna do is make the little balls out of the whole dough. So you have to oil the sheet. It has to sit in oil. By the way, I just washed my hands thoroughly. Okay, now I'm gonna punch this down a little. Which you do before you work with it. It rose, for whatever reason, it didn't rise as much as it usually does. I don't know. Now, if you find it sticky at all, which it does, it can be, you just always add a little more oil to your fingers. In fact, while you do this, you keep your fingers oiled. Grab a little bit. Let's see the size of it. That looks about right. And you put it on the tray. Here, let me move it this way so you can see the tray. If it's a little small, you can add some. All right, I hope to get about 60 balls. I hope, although it didn't rise quite enough, so I don't know. I think this is my grandchildren's favorite, the spinach and meat pies. Although they loved all the Syrian food. Gibber was the first meat any of the grandchildren had because it was soft. You know, it wasn't like chewy meat. And they all, my children too, that was their first meat that they had. Okay. What have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Good enough. All right. It continues to rise while it's sitting. So you don't have to make them huge. And they don't have to be exactly the same size. You know what it looks like. Nobody can. Although I think my Aunt Lily and my Aunt Agnes and my Aunt Larice, they made everything shaped beautifully. Beautifully. I can feel that I need a little more oil, so on my fingers I'm going to add some more. Up north in the wintertime, I would put the oven on like 350 while I was doing making the dough, and when it reached the temperature, then I would shut it off. And when I got the dough in the bowl, I would put it in the warm oven, and that would help with the rising too. Okay, we're gonna do the spinach pies first. I'm gonna just stir the spinach that we put together before, just to get all the flavors all over in here. Okay, need a napkin because you're gonna be dipping your hands and everything in the oil. Okay, so you prepare your pan by pouring some oil in here and spreading it around. Remembering the oil really enhances the flavor, so don't be stingy. All right, keep this within reach because you may need more. I don't waste the oil on my fingers. Rub it in here. Starting with the first layer that you put together, they've already risen a little bit. Take a little more oil and start going around in a circle. And you want to get it as big as it looks like you can get it without tearing it. Okay, then you're going to take a heaping tablespoon to start. Take a look at it. I say to myself, I could use a little bit more on here. If you make it too much, then you won't be able to close it and shape it. So hopefully I did it right. You pull up 2 sides from about the middle, okay? Then you pinch it down one of the open ends. Then you take the other and bring it back to meet the pinching area. And sometimes you have to repinch. And then you're going to look at it and say, oh, it looks a little funny. So you're going to try to shape it a little bit to get a real triangle out of it. Essentially, you're making a triangle out of a circle, so it's not that easy to do. Okay, and if it starts to separate, you just go back and pinch again. That's all. That's 1 down. 1 down, 59, 60 to go, I think. I don't know. But you can see each one doesn't take that much time. I mean, for me anyway, after all these years. Oil on the thing and on my finger. Okay. From the middle of one side to the middle of the other. Cross it over, connect it, pinch down, and then this other side, you have to pull it out a little, lift it up, bring it up to the top to meet the other sides. Then you're going to push it down a bit, squeezing the seams to get it as much like a triangle as you can. They rise like crazy when you're baking them, so don't worry about that. Okay. Nope, I got a little spot there. Let's try to fill it in. And you make it as round as you can. I mean, it doesn't come out perfect, and everybody will tell you it doesn't matter how they look. It only matters how they taste. And with everything you put in here, they're going to taste great. Okay. And you want to wipe your hands periodically so you don't have spinach on your fingers when you touch the dough, because then you'll get a little spinach. Now we pull the front up. They're a good size. Not too big, not too small. Oil thing. Put this up here, that will keep it. No, I won't have enough room. All right. I'm just trying to keep it from sliding. Okay. That's good. Around the middle. To the middle, lift, pinch, lift the front, pinch again, and that's it. The more you make them, the better you get. Nobody can do these well the first couple of tries. It takes a lot of years of experience and practice. How nice. They're going in. They're on 375. The recipe calls for 20 plus minutes. You want them, whoops, wrong oven. Don't worry about having them over 20. I often put them more than 20, but I always set the timer for 20. Nope, not yet. I'm gonna put them in for another 8. There's ever so slight golden on the top, right? But that's the key. These are ready. Stir the meat a little bit. Okay, that's it. Now it's ready to go. And these are going to take no time at all. But these I have to bake on these, what do you call these pans, Laura? Yeah, non-stick pans, because these will stick and you will tear them up trying to get them off. You've got to use non-stick pans for meat pies. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Some oil there, and now and there was oil on my fingers every time. That helps the dough to spread, otherwise it's just gonna whip right back at you again. Okay, now a good amount of meat. You can always add more if you want, which I do. Okay, you don't want to make it so thin that it tears, because it will puff up and you'll have thicker dough than this, but you don't want to tear it when you lift it. Okay? I can honestly say I've never had to throw out anything except once I made, believe it or not, a batch of jrebe, the Christmas cookies.
Mm-hmm.
I could not get that dough to roll. And I got so frustrated, I threw out the whole batch. And my father said to me, why don't you just make a ball, put it down, stick your finger in the middle, and it looked like you rolled the outside. And I said, because that's not how I learned to do it. He said, every once in a while you have to do things like that with Daddy. And I thought, I wonder how many times Mommy might have done that, never told me. No, not my mother. She knew how to do it beautifully. But my dad might have learned to do it that way. I don't know. So you have a sense of how much. There's quite a bit of meat here, because don't forget, the meat is going to shrink a little because there's some fat in it. It's not like your beer meat, so. But I have relatives who have made these things with beef. And I would say to make meat pies like this, I would buy like a 90% ground sirloin and use the salt and allspice exactly how you would if you were using lamb. In other words, a pound of meat, use a pound of salt and a pound of allspice. Do not put anything else in there except what's in the recipe, but I mean, don't use regular pepper. Only use allspice. And very few people would be able to tell the difference because of the spicing, you know, unless they were lamb lovers, then they could tell. But if you can get the lamb, that's the best way. But if you can't, make them anyway with beef. You can't do that with gibbeh because the cutting is different. Unless you buy beef, a good, really good cut of beef, and have them grind it the way you would have gibbeh meat ground. But